If not, then we'll figure something else. All right. Hi guys. Hey everybody.
No idea.
Hello. Thank you for joining us. Let's get a good read of the room. So tell me guys, who is it? Who here is an educator? Yeah, come on, don't be shy. Yeah, good. Okay. Who here is a game designer? Good. All right. So we got about half educators and half game designers. Who currently works with K-12? Good. All right. So we got about half-ish that works with K-12. Who works K-12 adjacent? Anybody? No? Okay, good. All right, yeah, there we go. I was going to say, I think you guys work K-12 adjacent. Awesome. All right, that gives us a pretty good idea. This is a small crew of people. So our whole idea today was to talk about this project that we've been working on and sort of talk about where it's going next. Give you guys any advice for similar projects that you might be thinking of. And we're happy to field any questions, but if you would like things to go in a different direction or if we're not addressing something that you had in mind, let us know. Should we get started?
I think we should.
All right, let's do it.
So just to be making sure you're in the right room, this is the room you intended to be in, and now we're here.
Yay.
So my name's Teon Edwards, and I work for TERC.
And I'm Kellian Pletcher, and I'm with GreenDoorLabs.
So TERC is a not-for-profit STEM education company here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. For over 50 years, we've been designing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics curriculum, museum exhibits, games, materials for classrooms, and conducting research on them, basically trying to improve STEM learning for all.
And GreenDoorLabs is an interactive educational indie games company, been around for around 10 years, and we work primarily with museums and informal education cultural spaces.
And I work for a group called EDGE, the Educational Gaming Environments Group, and a couple of years ago we ended up meeting up with Kellian and basically talked for a number of years about how cool it would be to get a chance to work together, and different ideas bumped around and so on, and then just a little over a year ago, we came up with a new idea. A science-based escape room. The whole idea here is to be like, okay, another question for the group. How many people here have done an escape room?
Yes,
yeah.
Well played.
Were they fun?
Yeah, I think that's a yes. That was
Did they make you think? So, any good escape room, regardless of what it's about, is actually having to engage your brain. You're having to problem solve. You're trying to figure out the puzzles and so on. And we thought, hey, this is a really great space in which we could be being deliberate about the things that you're having to be engaging your brain around without breaking the gaming at all, right? The escape room could be about anything. Hey, if we do it well and do it deliberately, it's still a really fun space.
Now, of course, we're probably not the first people in the world who have thought of creating an educational escape room, right? I mean, this is not news to create an educational escape room. In fact, Breakout.edu has been doing a really fantastic job with boxed escape rooms, and there are all sorts of regular escape rooms here in Boston with brick and mortar spaces that have considered how to go into the education space. But we wanted to do something a little bit different. We wanted to do something that was environmental, and we wanted to do something especially that was portable, something that could bring an environment into lesser served spaces of New England, places like Western Mass, or say New Hampshire or Maine, right? Like anybody who lives in Cambridge can get themselves to an escape room, but people in northern Maine, those kids don't quite have the same access. So what if we created something where we could build an immersive environment with educational components and connected to Common Core curriculum, but it was something that could move. And this was sort of our vision for this. We wanted something that had science content. This is our sort of stages that we're going through as we created this. Sorry, I thought we were on a different slide. So this is sort of what we went through. So we sat down, we chatted about it, like, okay, how can we do this together? And we decided that we wanted to create a prototype to start with, because it's really hard to create these big, massive installations, and so we wanted to build something that kind of worked to prove that we could create science puzzles. So this is kind of an overview of what we're going to do today, correct?
Okay. So we talked about the nature of the space, but we actually started with two ideas. One was, hey, I work for a STEM education company. I suspect most people have heard also the extended term STEAM, where we add arts to the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we thought, hey, this is a really fun, exciting space. And pair that with, hey, both Kellian and I are steampunk fans.
Obviously, who's not a steampunk fan? And we also, I find that when you create these kinds of environments, it really helps to start with something that people are fairly familiar with. So we piggybacked off of a novel from a couple years ago called the City of Denver. Has anybody read The City of Denver? You guys remember that one? No? Oh, that's sort of, yeah, kind of. All right, thank you very much. So, right, there's the City of Denver, and then there's the City of Sparks, and it's all about a culture that lives underground, right? So it's this post-apocalyptic culture, and they live underground. The thing that's exciting about this kind of a story is that everybody underground, they're all engineers. They have to create their own world in order to survive. And the children start becoming engineers at about 12 years old, which is right about our age group. So yeah, the other inspiration, ooh, is this a video? Can we play it?
The next one's the video, so if you're ready for that.
So our other inspiration, so City Member, yes, but also we wanted to do something closer to the Lost Lending Library. This was created maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago by Punch Drunk. You guys heard of Punch Drunk before? Yeah, interactive immersive theater company. They created Sleep No More. And they also do educational programs. And so the Lost Lending Library, they decided that they were going to have a secret magical library surprisingly like appear in inside elementary schools in England, right? So there's that this K through 5 school, and suddenly there's a mysterious library that's appeared. And then there was curriculum that was built off of this environment. And so you watch pictures of like kids going through and seeing this space, and their faces light up and they love it so much. We wanted to create something that had that same visceral sense to it, like not just like, oh, I'm unlocking locks and doing paper puzzles, but something that would really stick with them, something that would get them really excited and make them care about science. Can we turn that up? If I remember correctly, this video is about 10 minutes long.
Nope, this is shorter.
Oh, good.
About 2 days ago, there was a terrible bump.
Oh, there we go. We now can hear it. Do you guys see it okay? Yeah? Okay.
There's no typical days in the Lost Lending Library. Last week we were in Argentina, in a zoo, collecting stories about cougars. Before that, we're in the Sahara Desert. Camel came into the 24th floor, gave Fiona the shock of her life. The library always goes somewhere for a very special reason. I think it might be collecting new stories. Well, we arrived at this school about 2 days ago. There was a terrible bump. And then, not long after that, I was happily binding here, and some children walked in. Yeah, when we entered, it was dark, slow music, and dramatic music started to play.
Hearing some strange noises in the corners, and then the light was flickering off and on.
My daughter got home. She said, Mummy, we went to the library and it's so exciting. I need to finish this story. She went to bed so excited. The sharing in staff meetings just to say, listen to the buzz that this project is creating. It was all positive and it was just amazing. It's not just entertainment, it really serves the work that the teachers are doing and gives them a fantastic resource. It gave teachers license to think, we can do this, we can do more of this, that there are exciting and amazing ways in which children can learn that stays with them for a very, very, very long time.
Good. It's not the 10-minute version. So that's what we're going for, right? Not necessarily just sort of the pen and paper, yes, you can solve puzzles, but this immersive sense of like excitement and magic that's connected to science. That idea that you can play a character that solves things, that solves the puzzle, that solves the crime, that saves the day. And we wanted something that was going to be able to create that, but not just for English, for science. So the first thing that we did, because it's the most exciting part of education, is look at mass core curriculum. Because there's nothing like digging through state standards to really like spark your creative juices. But it had to be done, you know, like we wanted to make sure that we're, you know, didactic, that we had done all of our paperwork. So yeah, Teon, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in fact, while I don't love standards, God forbid, it's actually, for me, this is the exciting part. Game design is hard. Designing a good game is really hard. Designing a good game that's covering particular content is really, 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 really hard. On the other hand, I enjoy a challenge. We enjoy a challenge. And we got started on this because we could see the potential. This wasn't a, we're going to take X over here and Y over here and try to mush them together. As I said at the beginning, escape rooms are all about problem solving. They're all about figuring things out. And that really, at the heart of it, is what science is all about. We often teach science as if these little boxes up here are science. And they're not. They are standards, they are facts, they are sometimes twisted into, oh, ask questions and predict outcomes. That sounds like science. But you're then going to be tested on whether you get the right answer. And yes, an escape room has things where if you don't solve the puzzle right, you can't get out. But it has much more to do with the process of figuring it out and getting excited about that. Well, we went through all of the science standards for elementary school and middle school, and not surprisingly, the physical science standards were lower hanging fruit. We have ideas for other standards, but we started there, and we even more than that, we weeded down from those even further. And then we spent a whole lot of time brainstorming, sitting around a room, whiteboard, computers open in front of us, drawing things, sketching things, and tried to pair up multiple puzzles for each standard that we were going to address. Could we come up with multiple puzzles? Because one of the things we wanted to be clear about wasn't that you were going to do a puzzle and somehow miraculously at the end of that you're going to know that content standard. That's just absurd. We sometimes teach that way and we know it doesn't work, and it definitely doesn't work in an experience like an escape room. Instead, what we wanted to be doing was going at it after implicit or tacit experience with these ideas, with these concepts. And for part of that to happen, you needed to have repeated exposure to them. More like any good escape room, it's not like everybody is doing one puzzle and moving on to the next and moving on to the next. Things are happening all chaotically overall. You may never do anything at all with 1 or 2 of the puzzles, or 5 of the puzzles, or 6 of the puzzles. You know, you were spending your time over here. So if we were really saying that we were putting hooks into this for the science content, we needed to be having repeated experiences.
And it was really important for us to be able to set our goals ahead of time, you know, like what do we actually want to get out of this? Like what can we reasonably deliver? And like Teon said, like we can't promise that we can get kids to understand waves or matter, but we think that we can spark, we're pretty sure we can inspire, and we can definitely reinforce. And we can also start as a nexus, a starting spot for teachers to create other content, additional content that's connected to the story of these puzzles.
And TERC self-funded a small startup to get us going, to get to the point of having some prototypes, to be testing out, figuring out whether this really works, having stuff to be showcasing at events like this, so that we can see if we can take it to the next step of actually building the full room and making it modular and actually having places that want to host it and running. But we started with pieces of paper and sketches, as I said. So here's an example of one of our puzzles. We're looking at the standard explore the effects of balanced and unbalanced forces on the motion of an object. For both of the, you know, forces come in pairs, equal and opposite forces. There's lots of ways that this gets talked about. But we spent a lot of time going back and forth on how do we get at a puzzle that actually really highlights this. And we came up with this. Does anybody have any idea? Okay, for those of you who tried the other room when we were out on this table, button up for a minute. Anybody have any ideas, just looking at the visual here, of what one might be trying to do?
I know, it's mysterious looking. Yeah, Lizzie?
Put the cylinder in the
Yes, that is exactly it. Thank you.
Any ideas on how you might do that?
Yeah, no, anybody?
Wait, the black cylinder into the hole over to the right?
Yeah, we're trying to get the black cylinder to the circle that's on the far side, right?
Lift it up slightly with the string at the top.
So you can lift it up, but that still won't move it over because there was just sort of a hole there. So that will lift it up vertically, but it won't move it horizontally.
What's the purpose of having that string there? Is that a red herring?
Ooh, that was for reset. Yeah. So dowels, you said.
Oh, those are two like rectangular dowels. You can just put in the holes and just shove it over, right?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but what happens if you use just one of them?
So,
Oh, it's gonna tip over. You have to do.
It's going to knock it over, exactly, which is why you have a puller so it can reset it. Yeah, so if you just use one, then it's going to knock it over. But if you have both of them, so it's equal opposing force.
yes, our early drawings, our early sketches didn't have the reset.
I know. So then you've got like this dowel down, like, oh.
We've just set up something where our hope, realizing this from an educational point of view, our hope is that in fact people will try this first and will knock it over. And indeed, the majority of our testers do. They're saying, I want to be moving a cylinder from here to here. The natural thing to do is, hey, I got a dowel, I'm going to stick it in that hole and I'm going to push.
Yep, all the way in.
And it falls over. Yes!
We won!
That's what we want to have happen. Why? Because, remember our standard? Balanced and unbalanced forces. We need to be having, okay, this is highly unbalanced force. All the force was coming this way, it falls over. Okay, we need a little bit better. We actually built a balancing force into this.
So should we show the prototype? Yeah, so
Yep, so
our very ugly prototype.
there we go.
There it
We
is.
moved from our nice little sketches to something we could actually put in front of kids, that we could put in front of adults. We did this with small groups, individuals, sometimes kids and parent pairs, because part of our hope is that in fact we can engage, that we don't want to be building an escape room that only works for really young kids. We also don't want it to be so difficult that parents don't want to do it.
Yeah, there's not really a market for family escape rooms or family sort of puzzle experiences. I've talked to a lot of friends about this, and a lot of the reason is the liability. They're not quite sure what to do with it. A lot of these escape rooms, they work with companies. Like that's how they make their bread and butter is company events and stuff. So they'll just have lots and lots of people come in. Yeah, so we wanted something that we could actually have very young people and families work on together.
Right.
So can you guys guess which one we ended up with? Kiara, stop.
No, I
Yeah.
haven't.
No idea? No idea which one? Yeah, look
No
at
idea.
Okay, let's show them. Ta-da! Yeah, so we worked with the artist Hillary Scott, and we had these templates, but he had ideas for things that sort of looked better. So please, we'll try and finish up as soon as possible so you guys can come down and play with this stuff. But what he did instead was he put the thing that knocked down on a track, and you had to put the two things together to move it across the track.
Right.
So instead it was the tilting panel and dowels.
Right. So instead of needing a tower that falls over and that you needed a reset for, he's got something on hinges that when you push only on one side does this, and as soon as you stop pushing, pops back. But if you do this, it does this instead of that. So ingenious little design. We've discovered some issues with it since, but that's part of why it's prototyping and testing. And then notice this one now also has the additional element that we didn't even bother showing in particular in our sketches. For those of you, or which is most of you who've done an escape room, what is it that in the front of this gizmo? Call it out, everybody.
A 3-digit.
It's a lock.
It's a lock.
Yay.
We've got you in an escape room, and yes, we're having you undo a lock. By moving your thing, you're getting a code, you're unlocking something, and you get something you need to be solving some other puzzle in the room. We've done, as I said, we've tested this with people of all ages, and people tend to figure it out. We did the testing over the last couple of days, and we definitely get things where brute forcing happens, and so we have to continue to refine the design, but it's getting pretty close to something that not only works as a good puzzle that people find enjoyable, but it also actually is a good seed for getting at the science that we want to be getting at. So we then had another puzzle different content. This is looking at the energy transfer, specifically looking at light. Not exactly, the most innovative puzzle in the world. There's tons of, can you get the light from here to there with mirrors? But it's one of multiple puzzles, remember, that are getting at this standard. And it's a classic for a reason. It really is actually something that kids, especially of younger ages, don't necessarily understand, and that adults tend to think of in different ways than the science standard. We tend to think of how mirrors work incorrectly. It's one of the major areas of misconceptions. And while this doesn't delve into all of that, it is a good introductory experience to, hey, light travels, hey, I can use mirrors to redirect it, I can be using things to be transferring energy from here to there. This one, if you thought the last one was ugly,
this is why we prototypes.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing, is that this is for those of you who are doing game design. There is no shame in putting this in front of people. We did it for a reason, and we wanted to be able to quickly and easily make changes, try it out. We figured out we had to do things like, okay, where can this flashlight be? Okay, flashlights are a really lousy light source for this, because as soon as they travel any distance, they spread out. We knew that one already, but for prototyping, it still worked.
And our final product was not that. This guy. There we go. So yeah, so same thing. It's really exciting working with an artist. So if you ever have the opportunity and a little bit of funding, I always say that that's sort of the best investment that you can make, right? So you have all of these ideas. You can usually get an artist for anywhere between like $1,500 and $5,000, which depending on your budget is entirely reasonable, and it really takes your project from like kind of cool to really cool. So he came up with this idea. Hillary Scott was the artist that we worked with, and yeah, and I hope you guys get a chance to play with it because it still gets the job done, but looks much more exciting than my shoebox.
Yeah. So yeah, kids, parents, people were perfectly willing to interact with this when we asked them to. So that they were coming into prototype testing, they knew that's what they were getting into. We don't have to ask with this one. People walk up, they want to know what it is, they want to try it out. We do sometimes have to tell them, yes, it's okay to touch. Luckily, we're in an escape room. That usually isn't the problem. Usually an escape room or problem is, yes, you can touch that, please don't break it. And we did a whole series of prototypes. You can see 5 of them here on the table, 3 additional ones up there on the screen. And as you can tell, we actually, as Kelly was just indicating, we really did take the time to be making the cool factor high, because especially when we're talking about kids, you really want them to be intrigued. That's part of our testing on whether it works or not. And with checking out with these, one of the fun things is that things that some of our adult-only testing groups thought were really hard, the kids figured out quickly. What was the most common thing was that order, where adults would be saying, I think this is too hard or this is too difficult, and almost always they were overthinking it. And that the kids were actually closer to what we were intending and were much faster on solving, not all of the puzzles, but most of them. We also, as we did this, learned some things that we are not going to do. One of the puzzles up here is not going to be part of the final room. We just couldn't get it to work. We can make it into a fun puzzle. We can't make it into a fun puzzle that's covering the science content we need it to be covering, and therefore, it will be dropped.
That sounds so threatening.
You're out.
Spider. But no, the nice part is that we have these sort of cases, so we'll still use the hull of the spider. We'll just put another puzzle into it that means that the science a little bit better. Ooh, our prelim sketches. So the other thing that I think is really fun is we pulled on some really professional people to help us figure out how to do this. We got a set designer, head of set design up at Tufts, Ted Simpson, and he found out a way that we could expand and contract these sets so that it could fit in spaces that were large or small, because we didn't know what we were going to get. Like you might have a partner that has just a closet, you might have a partner that has an entire gym that we could use. So we wanted something that could scale with that. He created it into a couple of different sized rooms, right, with like sort of corners and joiners and things like that, and that we would plan out the room according to where our pop-up space was. So like I said, it can get very large for up to 20 people. It can get very small for down to 5 people. you know, O layouts, L layouts, U layouts. Flexibility was really key on this one.
Right, because really our intent is to be saying, instead of being a brick and mortar escape room somewhere, it's something that can pop up in different locations so that it lives at a school for 3 weeks and the school moves groups of students through. It's a part of a museum exhibit that's there for a couple of months and people pay tickets to go through. It travels out to a place and lives in a library, etc. And that's one of the things we're looking for is
people who want to sponsor and host and play with us.
We have a lot of expertise. We've done a lot of testing. We've got a design, etc. So far, we've self-funded getting things to a point, and we're ready to actually build the full thing. We've got it all set to go. We'll do some additional testing on some of the puzzles because they haven't gone through this length of testing, and TERC has very high standards for making sure. High standards for making sure that the science content is really there. But what we really need is we need to know that there are going to be enough people wanting to host a space, that there are going to be enough people wanting to come and do the escape room, that there's people out there that can turn this from, ooh, isn't that cool, into something that is an actual business, is something we can travel around, that we can have as a way to be reaching families, reaching school programs, reaching, and heck, reaching that corporate audience where they want a really cool escape room, and the fact that it's science is either a bonus or is completely incidental because it's a fun escape room.
More layouts. There we go. So, drilling down. What are we looking for? Why are we doing this? Howdy, partner. Right, we are looking for people who might potentially be willing to work with us in any capacity. Do you want to host a pop-up room in your space? Do you know somebody who would want to host a pop-up room? Do you want to help us manage it, right? Because, like, I'm a game designer, Teon's an educator. Do we want to manage a brick and mortar escape room all the time? Probably not. Like, we could, but if you know somebody who can do that or who would want to do it, talk to us. If you want to volunteer, set up, GM as a game master, staff, anything you want to do that's, you know, connected to this, just let us know. And sponsors, that would be delightful. We're pretty sure that we can build this off of grant money. Like, we're pretty sure that we can find funding for it, but grants always really like it when people are willing to co-sponsor. So if you guys know of anybody who's like, this is awesome, let's do this, let's discuss. Players, we want people to play this game, right? So this weekend is probably the most load testing we've ever had on this particular subset, on this prototype. It was built for science and it was built for looks. It was not built for its durability, so we knew that some things were going to break. But we need lots of people to play these things so that when we do build the durable prototype, that it works. Yeah, I mean, we will put together a mailing list so people can spread the word. Like, we want people to know that this is out there. And last but not least, did we say anything else? I think we did. Oh, no, we just closed it up. Yeah. All right, that is it. That is it. Yeah, so I mean, we had an hour to talk about this, and we could drone on for an hour, but we won't do that to you because it's pretty straightforward. We built a thing. The thing is cool. The science works. We want it to grow. You know, if anybody has any ideas of how to help us out to make this come to the next stage, then let us know.
And the puzzles are here. If people have questions they want to ask of the whole group, great. If people want to come up and actually just try playing them, they are not incredibly robust, but they work. They function, with one exception. We're just out of power on it. And so we encourage you to come up. We encourage anybody who wants to ask a question now of the group, or you can ask us in person. So again, I'm Teon Edwards.
And I'm Kellian. Any questions, anybody? Anything that we can expand on? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to what other designs you have in your head. Obviously, you've only made a few prototypes for cost reasons.
Yeah.
So these are all going to be in the sort of physical sciences, electronic space at this point. Do you have like a whole suite of other things that you want to play with?
We do. As a matter of fact, yeah, we've got a whole document of. I think we probably came up with about 24 puzzle designs. And we boiled it down to these 5 to prototype.
For prototype. The majority that we've done so far are in the physical sciences, but not entirely. And that was largely because it was, 1, low-hanging fruit. They are the easiest ones to translate. And 2, it's my background. So it was a natural place for me to start, but the document includes ideas in biology and chemistry. And we haven't done anything with astronomy, but that's also part of my background. I would love to do it. And environmental science. There's lots of possibilities. The piece that is true is that good puzzles of the interactive sets of things, the physical sciences really are, to be honest, an easier place to do this. But they're not the only place this can happen. One of the things I touched on but didn't highlight extensively is that the number of puzzles in the room and how many puzzles are there going to be on one standard. So we don't want to be going too far afield in any one room. In one room, if we're doing a set of physical science standards, we're going to keep it to that range. But if we end up with a partner, or if our funding goes off in different directions, or when we get really excited about something, we could be doing a room that had a different theme and therefore a different set of standards being addressed.
Yeah?
Did you have a particular age group in mind when you were designing, or do the standards belong to certain grades?
Yeah, these are specifically 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did a little bit of testing. We found that 6th graders were a little too cool for us. And as 2nd graders, it was too complicated. Although we have had, 8-year-olds and 14-year-olds that are engaged, but our sweet spot, was really sort of that 10 to 12 age, maybe 9 to 13 if we're being generous.
Yeah. So like late elementary school.
Late elementary school is where the standards are at. It's also sort of our target audience because it's not a big audience for existing escape rooms. So when we're thinking education audience, it's where we're aiming. We've done things with, as I said, middle school. There's definitely a gap where they sort of think they're a little too cool for it, but once they start engaging, they tend to get hooked. We haven't put it in front of many teenagers, but it's actually worked for them in a way that I was pleased to see, because having seen the middle schoolers, I thought we might have overemphasized it. And as I said, we've had groups that were all adult. There's nothing in the puzzles that is not adult appropriate, but 3rd to 5th grade science standards, and definitely making sure the room is appropriate for that age group to be in and solving and being really active participants.
Yeah.
Follow-up question.
Sure,
Do you
yeah.
have a time limit or a time frame in mind, or can you vary that?
In terms of how long people are going to spend in the room? Yeah, good question.
So we've been designing on the sort of the general assumption of the hour-long escape room, but it is not hard to be scaling up and scaling down based on the needs of a particular audience. So okay, it's a 43-minute class period, and you have to get them here and get them out again and cycle through to the next group and so on. We haven't done which puzzles do you take in and out to be making that transition, but we know that it would be something that we need to consider. And it may also be the ones where it's just like, okay, for the age of these kids, do we want to be adjusting up and down? For these adults, do we want to be adjusting up and down? But our base is the standard 1 hour lock-in.
That's the exciting part about being modular, right? Is that it's built to put puzzles in and out. It's built to put space in and out. So if we want to stretch it to 60, we can. If we want to cut it to 30, we can. Do you have a question, Keon?
Yeah, because this is so prototype, I don't know if it's an appropriate question, but as you are using Massachusetts educational standards and testing where students need to be at in this grade, in this field, or in this subject, what has your research or approach been about how creating an environment where it's a win-lose condition and it's a time condition, how that will help with the retention and learning of the information? That question only pertains to because you're basing it off of getting kids up to standard. Because after seeing people play an escape room, they're like, I don't know what happened, I don't remember, and it's gone.
Well, that's all about setting your expectations,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, and like we said, we never went into this being able to say to people, hey, guess what? You are going to know how force and matter works. And so, we really go into it just saying, we're inspiring, we're reinforcing, and we're sparking interest, but we are not claiming to be able to have a 10-year-old remember any of these standards.
Well, and more than that, we are very explicitly not doing, for people who play educational games that at the end they're going to say, this content at the end, they tend to be really bad games. So not only is, I think, it an unrealistic expectation, it tends to break the game. So my research is on what we call tacit or implicit learning. And so it's learning that happens and develops in a gaming space that you then work with teachers. In my other research, in this case, it could also be parents, other educators, the people running the rooms, to do what's called bridging. So what you're doing in the room is you're giving people repeated experiences with various concepts that are then priming them for when you then are going to say, oh, you remember in that escape the room when you did X? That's what we're doing here. Or in the place of a family, it might be as simple as, here's the trifold piece of paper that's giving you some reminders of, we're not going to give away all the puzzles, but here are the reminders of what they were, and hey, did you know all of these address this science idea? And then there is one of the things that will always be an issue, which is, especially in education settings, which is, okay, who are the kids for whom time is not a good idea? For whom are the kids, I'm saying kids, but it's always, for adults, they get to self-choose whether they even want to be doing this. But I'm highly aware of the differentiation issues of things, and that's one of the ones where you'd work with partners to be saying, hey, do we need to be making any adaptations to this for this group of kids? Anything from the background story is not appropriate for this particular group, just treat it like a whole series of puzzles to be solving, to, no, you have as long as you need, which is obviously hard in a school setting, to other variations, but we are aware of those issues. We are not designing for them at the moment, other than knowing that because the whole idea is that we'll be able to adapt if and as we can, was based on where they are.
Yes, so it seems like really high quality looking prototypes. It seems like you've got a narrative going. So what are your plans involving some sort of moderator, if you will, of someone who's coming in and like setting the stage for the students or the participants, if you will, on this?
Yeah, I mean, so we've actually been talking to Pathology about something like that. So I think what we probably would do is partner with a local escape room. When we go to different locations, then we will partner with the local escape rooms in order to staff it. But we hope to be able to support it with any sort of like educational content, so like, okay, this is how it runs, this is what comes first, this is what comes after, you guys can go further if you want, but rather than having me and Teon specifically there to staff it, handing that part over to somebody who knows how to run escape rooms.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the difference between knowing how to run escape rooms and that setup and knowing how to deal with the science content of things. One of the visions of models would be that, hey, you want to book a party that you can do things that, well, we actually can have the hands-on activities that are more explicitly science content afterwards. After school program, et cetera. And that's something where we would make sure the staffing is actually people who are knowledgeable about the science and the education components of things.
Yeah, and TERC has staff for that as well. Like TERC does after school programs, so that's the nice part about this, right, is that it's so super flexible. So like if TERC wanted to build their own programming off of that.
Around it. And like any good escape room, we built the in-room parts of the storyline into that, so that like, okay, so you walk in and we envision the very first puzzle is something that's actually pretty straightforward, but that ends up powering up the computer screen, which then acts like the hints board in your standard escape rooms. But it's one where one of the standards relates to communication sets of things, so we can actually integrate it into the very deliberate line of designing things while getting what we need for an escape room, which is they're floundering. We need to figure out how to help them take that small step without giving anything away.
So I don't know what exists in the space. I've heard a lot about paper crafting and cardboard prototyping and just generally using the lower cost entry point for creating physical activity for classrooms. Is this something that you think could maybe down the line, once you've refined these, to make it accessible to people who are further away, further afield, is to make like sort of printable, do-it-yourself kind of cardboard designs for things that would be specific activities that a teacher could incorporate to augment existing curriculum material?
Well, I mean, that's not quite the model for this one, just because breakout.edu is so good, right? I mean, like, they do a really good job, and there's a lot of people that are building these sort of paper escape rooms for educators. And so, my strength is sort of like in building these like environmental location-based experiences. So we're sort of pushing in that direction. I mean, maybe down the road, if this is popular, we could partner with somebody like, breakout.edu. But silly to go into a space where somebody's doing something so well, and be like, hey, we're going to compete with you guys, for the thing you're doing well. But hopefully partnerships will emerge down the road.
Well, and TERC certainly designs materials like that deliberately to be going into the classroom. So like, okay, how do we do good hands-on activities, experiences, materials, little puzzles, etc. So yeah, the intent here really is to be saying, hey, we don't want to be reducing education to the here's the box version. The commercial versions, they're where the real thing is. Education, you get this. Yeah. We want to be making, at least as our starting place, the full immersive, isn't this fun? Oh my God, we got out, or we didn't, but most people don't experience.
Right, that idea that, hey, we built you guys something special because you matter. You know, why not? Any other questions? Yeah.
I was curious, like, for a time, so I teach 4th grade,
oh, cool.
And like this would be amazing
right.
for my kids to do. So I was just curious, like time frame, like when you were thinking you would actually have it ready to actually try with the classroom or something to actually go through.
It almost entirely depends on funding,
yeah.
Which is we self-funded so far. We haven't ruled out that we'll self-fund the full build, but we need at least some level of, yes, this can go into this particular space for a while to be making that, because what we don't want to do is build it and then have it run through the people who can get to it locally here in Cambridge and then never go anywhere else, because that's not a good use of our things. So our original hope was that it was going to be available for next summer. At this point, I'm not sure that's going to happen.
We know that we can physically, we are capable of getting this off the ground within 6 months.
Yeah.
So that's not a problem. The problem is where's it going to go, right? So we know that there's 2 things we can do. You know, number 1, we can either self-fund, or number 2, we can grant. But either one, they're going to want places that we're saying that it's going to. So if you know anybody that would like to house something that your 4th graders can visit. Yeah, I know. It's okay. It's okay. I know, neither do we.
But I would bring my classes to you if you do it.
Yeah, well, actually, that's also good.
No, we did that deliberately. We really are. We're knowing that there are teachers out there who want to be doing it and think it would be great for their class as part of being able to convince other people that actually building the thing is worthwhile.
Are you talking about the full modular, like the actual UOL shape design, that, or do you mean like?
Oh no, we mean the big thing.
Because I need, if you can set up space constraints, like how high, like how you need your ceilings, and how like wide you need your space. Is this indoor versus outdoor versus like what the parameters of the modular set are? I can look into channels.
We can do that.
I'll send you an email.
Yes, we actually have the Ted Simpson when I mentioned that in the designs, we've got very clear specs. We're ready to construct specs for things, so we can get you that information.
Yeah, so again, if we can get say we can get a bunch of Boy Scout groups and classes or something like that to sign up and be like, hey, if you have this in a place, we'll 100% come to that. And I think that will help us in our mission as well. Does anybody else have questions? Yeah.
So I'm wondering, with these super cool props that you have, I think the word is affordance. Like when I've done an escape room before, it's been in an office setting where I'm oh, it's like a file folder. I know what I'm supposed to do with that. Have you experienced any do kids want to take the nuts and bolts off of things? Is it obvious what you're supposed to do with it once you walk up to it, and how?
There have been a mix, and some of them are ones that we will change as designs on things. So one of the issues we've run into is that parts of this puzzle look like parts of that puzzle, and they are vital to that puzzle, and they are incidental to this puzzle. And so depending on what order people do things in, this is part of solving this puzzle. This hides the thing to turn something on. That pairing was a bad mistake.
Yeah.
Because people think of things so that, and then but for the most part, the things that people have trouble with are either because it's a prototype and it's not perfect. We have a lot of that, there's too small print and so on. Fear of just touching things, but once they get over that, those few things where we're going to change our design things, which is the reason to be going multiple stages of prototyping. So we haven't built the really robust long-term one and gotten it wrong. But for the most part, people figure out what they're needing to do, and for the most part, they're not trying to take things apart, with the exception of the most common thing is.
One thing that I think is going to be a little bit different than your standard escape room is that when you go into an escape room, usually there is a screen and sort of a camera. But I don't know if you necessarily want to do that with a bunch of 8-year-olds, right, in a room. And so we may actually end up having the GM be some sort of an actor. that's there in their lab coat, being like, you know, oh, be careful, don't touch that, you know, giving kids a little bit more affordance, like a little more background to go off of, so they know what to touch and what not to touch.
So, and that's one we'll
the
have.
fourth grade teacher was like, yes.
We'll really have to play it by ear. And figure it out. And I think even more to the point, it may have to be different in different situations, which is there may be the fourth grade class where so like no, we know ahead of time this school, this set of kids, whatever it is, we need a little more we need an adult in the room, and we prefer it not to be an adult who's just there to be doing don't touch things, but build them into the story.
Yeah.
Versus you might have a third grade class where they're sort of like, as long as you tell them ahead of time to not stick their fingers in the light socket, they're going to be okay. And they'll listen, and instead of in writing for the hints, it might have to be audio, etc. So far, the most common sets of things that we have to be doing are actually telling people to touch.
Right.
But it's also true that like it's a prototype. I can lift this thing up. If I lift it up, it doesn't work as the tent of the puzzle, because you can tilt it and do things, means you don't have to solve it the way it's intended to be solved. And that's probably the closest to an example of something where in a room the players are doing something that would not be desirable, and how do you stop them from breaking something?
Yeah, but as it's shown in the video for the Lost Learning Library, like they had an actress in there. So I think that it wouldn't break the world at all to put a scientist in there. Any more questions? You guys had all sorts of wonderful questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, well, in that case, I think we'll probably wrap it up, but please come down and play with our puzzles. It was great to have you guys here. Thank you very much.
Yes.